Right, let me introduce you to Julie Weeks. Julie was obviously part of our panel, so you already know her. She is the CEO and President of Womenable. She's based in the States, at the forefront of driving forward women's enterprise in America. It's fantastic for us to get the opportunity to hear the perspective from, well, particularly such a huge business community as the States. So we're really grateful to have her here. I will hand you over to Julie Weeks.
I'm so glad to see everybody stayed around, or almost all of you. That's very good. And it's a pleasure for me to be back over here on this side of the pond. I've been asked to speak to you about what's going on with women's entrepreneurship across the pond. And 2013, this year is a momentous year in women's enterprise development in the United States. It's the 25th anniversary of the Women's Business Ownership Act of 1988. It's also the 10th anniversary that Jackie Brereton was talking about earlier of the launch of the UK Strategic Framework for Women's Enterprise Development. And today is a good day because it's the launch of the Consultative Framework for Women's Enterprise in Scotland. So it's a good opportunity to take a look at what's gone on in women's entrepreneurship in the United States, what kind of lessons can we share and learn from one another. What I'm not going to do is the headline in the Herald of Sunday. I'm not going to tell you to emulate the United States because I don't think everything that we've done has been very good. And there's a lot that you can pick and choose from. So what I will do is just share with you some of the stories in the history, and then you can pick and choose what you think would be useful and apply it. And I will end with some recommendations and thoughts on the matter too. I have some PowerPoint slides that, yes, and this is a picture of the view out my window, practically. On the left-hand side, the view of Lake Michigan, where I live, and the view of the Scottish Highlands from a couple of years ago when I was tramping around up there with Jackie, having a great time. So the next slide will show you where we stood 25 years ago today, pretty much, because our law was passed in October of 1988. Before the Big Bang, which is what we call the Women's Entrepreneurship Act, there was really a lack of knowledge of women's entrepreneurship or women business owners themselves. Who were they? There was a lack of any kind of public sector policy or programs for women's business ownership. There was an Office of Women's Business Ownership in the U.S. Small Business Administration, but it had no portfolio. So I think one recommendation on the Minister for Women's Enterprise is don't just give somebody a title on a business card. Go well beyond that, because it was given in the United States to this office in, I think it was 1979, and it was not until 1988 that it actually had something to do. So don't just give somebody a title, give them something to do. So there's my early piece of recommendation. There was only one women's business association, the National Association of Women Business Owners. But that act, the Women's Business Ownership Act, did four big things. First of all, it told our U.S. Census Bureau, which does a business census every 5 years, and had started counting women-owned businesses, but not all industries and not the largest C corporations. It told them, start counting all women-owned businesses. Secondly, it extended our Credit Opportunity Act to cover business credit. Up until 1988, women could not get business credit in their own name. Thirdly, it established a National Women's Business Council, which were women business owners and representatives of women's business groups to give policy advice to the national government. And it established a program of women's business centers for entrepreneurship development training. And those four aims really sparked an awful lot of activity. The next slide, please. There's been tremendous progress then over the last 25 years. We've gone from one major women's business organization to dozens of them. There are a couple of women's business organizations that were incubated in the United States that are now in operation here in the UK. Don't know that there's as much activity up here in Scotland, but The Women's Presidents Organization has several chapters. Those are women business owners that have achieved $1 million or more in revenues. And We Connect, if you haven't met and chatted with Maggie Berry at all yet, Maggie, you're out there somewhere. There she is over there. We Connect is an organization started in the U.S. but based on getting women business enterprises that are majority owned to sell their goods and services to large corporations, and they're also involved in government procurement internationally too. So all of you who are majority women-owned businesses should be certified on We Connect and should get engaged in that marketplace because it's a great avenue for growth. So that kind of activity, those organizations really started spurring a lot of growth and a lot of visibility. The census that came out right after they were told to count all women-owned businesses increased the number of women-owned firms that we knew about by about 5%, but it more than doubled the revenue and the employment of women-owned businesses. And when that came out, imagine the shock and surprise by government and corporations and others who had assumed that all women-owned firms were very small, they were home-based. That's because they weren't all being counted. And now that really increased the level of activity and interest in women's owned business development. And so banks, other corporations, anybody that was marketing to businesses in general really started focusing on women business owners as a marketplace. So let me tell you just briefly now, what's the state of women-owned businesses today in the United States? And if I could have the next slide, please. What I've done for the last couple of years is, with support from American Express Open, has published a state of women-owned businesses. The next couple of charts I'm going to show you are from the 2013 report on the state of women-owned businesses, which you can download and look at for free if you like. I'll tell you about that later. You can go to womenable.com and find that out. But there are now in the United States today 8.6 million majority women-owned businesses that are employing nearly 7.8 million workers in addition to the owner herself and generating over $1.3 trillion in revenues. What is so interesting for people who are watching Business Growth Matters is that the growth in the number of women-owned businesses in the United States, even though there's still a gap in terms of there being 29% of the business population being women-owned firms, but the number of women-owned firms is growing at a rate that's 1.5 times the national average. So even though there's still, women are less likely than men, if you take a snapshot of today, to own a business, they are closing that gap by starting businesses at a faster rate. They are growing also, if you're comparing privately held businesses, which is where majority owned, privately held women-owned businesses, they are growing much, much faster than all other privately held businesses. They're only falling short, again on this chart, compared to the very large publicly traded companies. They're going very, very well after the recession, but everybody else is going not that well. In fact, the next chart shows you that we took a special look this year of what's happened since the 2007-2008 recession, and I was quite startled to see, and we don't, I guess, haven't talked about it that as much in the U.S., is that there are actually fewer people working in the United States now, in active employment than there was in 2007 and 2008. And that's including the public sector, the military, education, government. But looking at the private sector, which is what this chart shows, that chart. Most of the jobs that have been created in the private sector since the recession in the U.S. have been large publicly traded companies. Small business has actually lost employment in the United States, except for women-owned businesses. 175,000 net new jobs in the last 6 years created by women-owned firms, whereas men-owned firms and equally owned firms lost employment collectively in terms of net new jobs. And this is a pretty startling statistic, and I think it's shown a lot more people that women-owned firms are really kind of one step in front of the other, keep on going, and that's the mentality. Two huge mega trends going on in the U.S. over the last 10 or 15 years, what I'm going to show you briefly now. The next chart shows you what has been the growth in the number of women-owned firms by industry sector. And even though it's a very, very busy chart, what it shows you is that women-owned firms are in every single industry, and in 8 out of the top 13 most populous industries, the growth in the number of women-owned firms in those sectors are exceeding the growth of everybody else in that sector. So one major thing that we say now in the US is there really is no stereotypical woman-owned business anymore. A decade or 2 decades ago could have been pet sitting, the corner beauty salon, or something like that, that was a stereotypical woman-owned business. But now, given that the great diversification into industries, there is no such thing, I don't think, as a stereotypical woman-owned business. The second major megatrend going on in the US, which shown by the next chart, is that firms owned by women of color are really driving the growth in women's entrepreneurship. There's been a 59% increase in the number of women-owned firms over the past 16 years in the US, but there's been 156% growth in the number of firms owned by women of color. And that is found in every major ethnic group. 258% growth in the number of African-American women-owned firms, 216% in Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, 180% Latina growth, 156% Asian American, and 108% Native American and Alaska Native. There is just tremendous amount of growth, and 16 years ago, 1 in 6 women-owned firms in the US was owned by a woman of color, and now it's 1 in 3. So this is a really phenomenal trend. Secondly, let me tell you very briefly, the next chart will show you, we talked a little bit earlier about how relationships are important, not only networks for women business owners, but I've been cozying up over the last 15 or 20 years with my friends at the Census Bureau, since they are the ones that have the mother lode of data. And I'm always after information and data because knowledge is power. And I asked the question about a year ago to them. I said, I've been confounded by the fact that despite all this growth in women-owned firms, just 2% of the population of women-owned firms has $1 million or more in revenue. Today, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, do you have the ability to look at that $1 million plus firm population with any more detail? Because they only publish, that's the largest, highest sales category, and they said, well, sure we do, because we have the exact revenues of all these firms. And I said, well, then could you possibly prepare for me, print me off a few charts of, a couple spreadsheets of, 1 to 4.9, 5 to 9.9, and 10 million plus. Women-owned firms, all firms, for the past 2 censuses, just so I could see, what the trends are. And the results are this chart here. We found that the number of women-owned firms that had $10 million or more in revenues was actually growing at a rate that was 47% faster than their peers of other $10 million plus businesses. So that's taking away the argument of, well, of course it's phenomenal growth because it's from a very small base, but really there are hardly any firms that have $10 million or more in revenue, so you're talking about 2 relatively small bases. But to have the fact that women-owned firms at that level are growing so much faster than average is showing you that something's going on, and it's something that nobody really realized because it was never published. There's never, so there's another report that was out very earlier this year called Growing Under the Radar, which is all about this has been happening right under our very noses. And so there's a lot of positive activity that may be going on in Scotland and the UK and Latin America and Africa that's not being measured. And I think that that's another important general point to make, is make sure as we're going along and planting seeds and getting things developed, measurement is really important. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a researcher. It's because I've seen that if you have that kind of information, you can really not only foment change if change needs to happen, but you can see what kind of progress has been made. So where are we going now? The next chart shows you, I don't want to be dramatic about, so severe climate change that we're, all going to die or something. But it seemed to be a good analogy because 25 years ago, before the Big Bang, which then got me thinking about geological epochs and things like that, there was a spurt of growth and activity. But now we're entering a period of flux. And I'm talking about we in the United States, but I think also in a lot of enterprise development around the world. In the US specifically, our Women's Business Center program is under fire by conservative folks in our US Congress who just want to cut spending and want to go back to a one-size-fits-all mentality in business support, which is driving a lot of us crazy. There was an organization that did a lot of good work in the 1990s, the Center for Women's Business Research. It did a lot of good work because I worked there for a while, and Sarah Carter and I did a project here in the UK, but it has now ceased operations as of a couple of years ago. There's a decline in funding in the public sector. Women's entrepreneurship and women business owners themselves are still growing, but we're still being confounded by the gap, in growth of women at a medium to high level. And so I see some of those parallels here in the UK with a lot of growth and promise in the launch of the UK Women's Strategic Framework 10 years ago, discussions about having women's business centers, and launching some, including Well Park here 20 years ago. But then, as we all know, governments change, the political people change their focus, and we can't sustain the support for women's enterprise or any other particular issue just waiting for somebody else to do it. So let me close by telling you sharing with you a couple of lessons learned. That's my last chart. Firstly, I would say, what I've learned and what I think can apply very equally well here is that policy is very important. In fact, it's necessary to spur a lot of action. And in fact, it's not a charitable gift, it's an investment in economic development, but it is not sufficient. Not only because it's not sustainable in terms of interest by political persons and also people in agencies, but you just can't grow businesses or an environment just by imposing it from the top. You also have to have a lot of action and energy and vibrancy from the grassroots and the community. Advocacy is really critically important, and I think women in particular and women entrepreneurs especially have been saying, well, I'm just busy growing my business, I don't have time for that advocacy thing, and it's somehow unseemly or something. But really what it is speaking for those who can't speak or don't want to speak, and also making sure that your personal gains in your business get shared. I mean, there are always going to be some really good, strong entrepreneurial folks who can make it no matter what. And the worst thing is to see them way up here and no ladder in between, where we are now and their high level of achievement. We have to build those kind of structures to allow more people to pursue their dreams and to climb that ladder, and advocacy is critically important. And so having harmony in the voices speaking up is important, and it's not harmony as in everybody singing the same thing. What I like about the allegory of harmony is you're in a different octave, you're doing a slightly different thing, but together, the whole orchestra of voices is helping women, ethnic minorities, immigrant communities, and others really fulfill their dreams. And so it's very important to do that. I also think it's interesting, the conversations this morning are, about one-size-fits-all versus tailored support. And Ian's controversial comments, which I happen to agree with, that setting up a parallel structure for women's enterprise support that looks like or that emulates what mainstream support is perpetuating structures that don't work that well for women. And even if we say that it's all for women, I think we have to start thinking and embracing the fact that we do, as I said earlier, think, learn, and lead differently, and why shouldn't our measures of support for one another be different? And we shouldn't be apologetic for that. I think we need to step up and make that alternative route, because as we know, I mean, there's not just one road to get from thinking about a business to actually launching and growing. There are multiple ways to start and grow a business, and we all have different goals and, you know, want to do something that's a social enterprise versus a for-profit enterprise. And so why should one size fit all in the kinds of support that we put together and in the structures that we build for that? And I think that finally what we really need to realize is that our best asset to do all this is all of you in the room. And I think the US case, like 25 years ago, was kind of an interesting one, because this law only got passed because women themselves pushed it. You have a case here where government is equally, if not more, interested in planting seeds and helping create some good, strong support here. So why not, A, take advantage of that, because it took us a long time to convince people to do that, but B, don't let it rest there, and make sure that all of you who are women business owners, you're not only women business owners, but you're women's business advocates. Because if you get out in your communities and talk and act and be a role model and help develop structures of support, whether it's mentoring or networks or whatever, that's where the success is going to lie. And I will very much look forward to seeing that happen. Thank you very much.